without further ado, I'd like to introduce foodie, foods sovereigntist. That's not a phrase. Food justice warrior, flavor maker, and all around amazing woman, Sofia Florencia from Norwood, Colorado. So I'll hand the mic over to you, Sofia.
Hello, everyone. Good day. Kwalitlanesi. Buenas tardes, buenos días, wherever you're coming from. Thank you for being here. First of all, just want to ask permission for the knowledge to be transmitted and be presented in this platform. And tuning in from actually Cherokee lands right now, from occupied Cherokee lands in beautiful Weaverville, North Carolina. I've been taking a summer vacation with my family, and it's such an honor to be here. I'm gonna briefly just tell you who I am and how I'm in Norwood, Colorado. So I'm Mexican, born and raised-ish, lived all over the world. I spent 10 years in Mexico. I was born in Mexico City. My father, Francisco Jose Flores Pastrana, is from Xochimilco. His great-grandfather was a flower farmer in Xochimilco on the Chinampas. That's from my dad's side. From my dad's side, I also have Basque Spanish lineage. From my mom's side, they come from southern Veracruz and Tabasco, so Gulf of Mexico, cacao people. And I also have from my mom's side, Italian ancestry. So I'm a mix. I grew up also in Switzerland, moved around a lot for my father's work. So was in Switzerland for the very first years of my life, then moved to Argentina, Buenos Aires for about 3 years. Switzerland was 4, UK for about 3 years, then Raleigh, North Carolina for about 3, and Mexico for 10 years when I was a teenager and starting university. And then I moved by myself to San Francisco in 2004, where I've mostly lived like the most years of my life there. I spent 5 years on the island of Maui on Kanaka Maoli territory, and 2 years in Miami Beach, where I was directing and managing a plant-based culinary school. And so I come from a background of a multicultural background, and I'm blessed and grateful to have had an upbringing in countries where the food systems are very much protected, and access to whole foods and markets and seasonal vegetables and just an abundance of access to essentially bounty harvests. And so bringing that, once I got to Mexico, I was a little bit shocked. So I was living in Cuernavaca. My father would work in Mexico City. Cuernavaca is south of Mexico City. And I was a little bit shocked about, after living in all those places, the amount of hybrid food that I would see all around me in Cuernavaca. And it's, when you look at abundance, there's definitely bioabundant and heirloom seed places in Mexico that you can see in photographs, but sometimes it's not all as rich as you think. A lot of it is hybrid seed, a lot of it is waxed fruits and vegetables. So by the time I decided to go into culinary school, so I actually come from a vegetarian family just by ancestry. My mom's side is all vegetarian families. And so naturally, I just kind of have this palate for more veggie forward foods. I started to teaching myself how to cook. And then I went to culinary schools. I have a base in actual formal culinary, like European culinary school education, hospitality, and all that kind of stuff. But I never loved it because of the holes that I found in the systems that I didn't know how to word it, but I just knew this wasn't exactly what I wanted. Something didn't feel okay. It was all this focus on French culinary methods, but using like not the food, like not amazing produce like I was used to before. So I started questioning things. I was like, why can't I find the same foods that I grew up with? In this case, it was like Switzerland and you know, places that were a little bit more kind of like biodiverse. Again, Cuernavaca is considered a suburb. So if you really want to see the wild foods and the heirlooms, you kind of got to go into rural settings, more in the markets of that area. Also, my mother mostly shopped at supermarkets. So we all know kind of like what the grocery stores are. You're not going to find like the super sexy foods there much. When we would travel, we would for sure go into rural places in Mexico. And anyways, my dad just kind of really inspired me since a really young age to nurture that palate and that flavor and following like the tastes and cooking methods and cultures. And so it's kind of like my family was just really into exploring that world of food and culinary and flavor and tastings and pairings and all these things. So once I moved to San Francisco, and I moved originally to San Francisco not knowing what it was, I think I just knew the Golden Gate in San Francisco, but little did I know that I ended up in the organic progressive food movement, epic farmers markets of what the Bay Area is and restaurants. And so for me, it was just kind of like this culinary dream happened. And I mostly waited tables in San Francisco for a long time and made it to a point to work at farm to table restaurants with evolving menus, seasonal menus, and just the food system that is California Bay Area. It's phenomenal. And to me, that's been an inspiration for that to be the minimal expression that can happen everywhere in the United States, you know? So being in San Francisco, it was really relatively easy to access culturally relevant foods like my tamales. You know, I knew how to find the fresh masa at the Ferry Building on Saturdays, and I would go over here to like get my tortillas and things like that. So there was never this feeling that it was never there. It was actually really, for the most part, I could find it, no doubt. So when I moved to, Chad and I decided to conceive, we decided to move to Maui. And we moved to Maui on a friend's property to have a home birth. I didn't want to stay in the city to birth our child. And so I had a beautiful home birth. And the one thing that was mainly not there in my home birth, which is a rite of passage, it's a ceremony. So in these moments, it's really important that the mother and that your environment is providing you with nourishing foods, but culturally relevant foods. And I didn't necessarily have that. I'm in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So there was like this absence of that kind of food. The Mexican food you find on the islands, well, at least on Maui. On Oahu, there were these people that were doing the same thing. They're kind of, I'm not sure what they're up to right now. They're Masa Hawaii. But there was just this like absence of real Mexican food, meaning people that are actually making the nixtamal process for their corn-based tortillas, tamales, tacos, whatever, right? And like sourcing good corn, non-GMO, organic land-raised corn, that just tastes like basically like the markets when you're walking in Mexico and someone's making tortillas. Like it just, for me, I'm really picky about eating Mexican food somewhere because it all just tastes the same. It tastes like Cisco food service. The tortillas are really cheap. They have preservatives in there. It's just cheap ingredients don't make sexy food, like period, you know? So I'm just like I have this blessing and curse of like being able to taste like 70 flavors all at the same time. And it's a curse for my mother because I just can't eat leftovers, you know? I would be like, Mom, this isn't fresh. This is like a leftover. And I would just nail it almost like how many days it had been in the fridge. So with that's my superpower. I was able to really understand that I didn't have these foods and I needed to somehow source them. So right at the time, Jorge Gavira, who's the founder of Hacienda, they're located in LA. He started doing what nobody had done before, which is like everybody that's trying to make Mexican food is like, we just don't have good corn, like the corn that tastes like home. And a big thing is that the corn that comes from Mexico. So this corn is grown and cared for by biodynamic generational farmers doing everything by hand. They don't have, because there's no economy, like there's no infrastructure to invest in irrigation or big equipment. So they just kind of have to do this by hand. And so what happens is that they will plant the corn right when they know that the rains are going to start. So it's very seasonal, and it's never like, oh, it's the second week of, April, and then this is when we start growing the corn, which that's the kind of like mentality that I've heard a lot of farmers do here in the States that have access to money, big equipment, big machines, irrigation lines, etc., land, right? So Mexico land-raised heirloom corn is really just grown in all kinds of terrain by the elements, by basically knowing that the rain's going to come, getting a feel for it because they know the land, they've been working that land forever, and this knowledge is passed down generationally, right? So that is priceless. Like you can't just essentially, it's purely magic. It really is when you think about what these people do. And so they just know exactly when it's harvest time. They know how to select the seed for the next planting, how to save it, the whole thing. It's just something that they do. It's a lifestyle, really. It's their life depends on it, because if they fail, then they don't eat, right? And so then what I've seen here in the USA, even if it's, let's say, organic corn, I mostly see just irrigation lines and different farming methods, and it really just doesn't taste the same. Honestly, it comes down to flavor, of course, and then it just comes down to the fact that most people that are able to farm on lands in what we call, let's say, Colorado, are not from the place, so they're on native land and they don't have that knowledge. So that's just something to take a look at, right? So once I found out that Jorge Gavira from Hacienda was like, I think his website was just about to launch, and I found him. I was like, I need a bag of corn, so I got a 55-pound of beautiful bolita amarillo corn from Oaxaca, from the Central Valleys. And I got it super expensive shipping, to Hawaii. And I started just doing the process that I had seen been done over and over and over again. Unfortunately, I didn't really meet my grandmothers. But, when you're in the postpartum time, you're in such tender place that if you're quiet enough and you just allow for the process to happen. I was mature enough in like an emotional and spiritual sense that I started hearing the whispers of my grandmothers, and they were just coming through me, who were just guiding me in this process to source this corn from far away and bring it into the kitchen, and then doing the thing that I had seen done in markets and in restaurants and here and maybe in school and like someone's like auntie and that kind of thing, and do it myself really for the first time, and being patient. It didn't take me a lot of trial and error. I kind of just like at the beginning just did it, and it would just coming out. And once I started playing with different varieties, that's when I started kind of like learning curve, like just it's been a long learning curve, lots of trial and error after like that initial sort of like, I got this, and then it's like, no, I don't got this, and then it's like, okay, I got this, and doing essentially the nixtamalization process, which is essential not only to nutrition, but to make a tortilla, which is what I've been doing at farmers markets on the island of Maui, and then now in Norwood. Kind of, it's just started. I started making this, and I started making tamales actually. And then started making tamales, and Chad, my husband, who will chime in a little bit, he's like, well, make tortillas. I'm like, okay. And then I took a little taste of a pumpkin tamale to the farmer's market manager on Maui, and he was just like floored and loved it. And he just like made me a spot, like, so I could just like come and sell tortillas. He's like, the tamal is awesome, but you need to make tortillas. I'm like, okay. And it was just easier because tamal is under the hazardous food list, so it doesn't qualify as a cottage food. So tortillas qualify as a cottage food. So meaning for those, because I know there's somebody here from Oaxaca, I read that. That's really cool. Hola, Lili. In the United States, you kind of have to go by like certain regulations per the food department. So tortillas are on the list that you can make from home. In most states, don't require inspection, just like a certain label, and you can sell to the public in that way. You can't sell wholesale, like for a store to sell for you, but you can sell yourself at in public settings. And so I started doing that, and then just kind of took off. And now Abuelita Technology is, that's the name of my business. It's really more than just making tortillas, tamales, and all that. I'm telling a story, and I'm telling the story of corn and how we have forgotten that everybody that exists on Turtle Island, mostly this is more of a message to the people north of the border, that corn is from here. So it originates in Oaxaca, kind of like Guerrero, Oaxaca, like it's born there from this ancient grass. It's hand tended, hand selected by people. And then it just becomes this abundant cob that we all know for generations of people selecting seed, and it just takes over. And without the corn mother in this way, civilizations does not exist. We owe everything to her. So the bounty of what has been what we call America has really been based off of corn, maize. And so what happened with contact was settlers come, settlers take over land, settlers take over taste buds, they bring their own crops, they bring their own grains, and corn kind of starts fading out. But what happens is that corn is really fertile, really kind of like, it's a grass family, so it just grows so easily. And of course, then biotech comes in and starts manipulating corn genetically, but also starts using it for, so biogenetic engineered corn is GMO, and starts using it for other things that are not even for food. So it's contact happens around the World War II, corn gets taken in the US, it's bastardized, and it's just kind of like being used for everything but the nourishment for the people. But at this point, because of how Native people have been pushed out, there isn't an understanding and a relationship with corn, because it was just basically just brutally bastardized. So what I'm about and Abuelita Technology is by telling again this corn story and coming up with solutions of what we can do. And then also, so this platform kind of has taken a more educational approach. And not only do I dream of corn nation, and I don't even like saying corn, because from my studies, corn just meant, it's basically a settler colonial word to refer to any corn. So to me, that kind of diminishes the value of what the corn mother maize is. So I like calling it maize more than corn. I'll go back and forth with it so we can kind of like remember our brains, because when we're adults, we have to like repeat things a lot of times so we can like grasp it. I love the word maize because it's an origin at Taino word. So it comes from Puerto Rico. And that's the corn that they have for maize. And it just feels more authentic because it has native roots, the word. In Nahuatl, so Mexica Aztec people, the plant has many names depending on the stage of growth the plant is. So that's the magic that it is. And so I speak the dream of Maize Nation. I really want us to remember our responsibility as for example, right now I'm a settler on Cherokee lands for a temporary moment. So we remind ourselves that we are settlers on Turtle Island, and that our greatest responsibility is to caretake of the seeds that were and are originally here, and what role we play within that, right? So I speak the dream of Maize Nation, so we can kind of like go back into understanding that we're responsible for being conscious consumers in this consumerist culture and bringing about Maize Nation, which is what I want to see. And then also I'm working on a reforestation project for cacao trees in La Selva Lacandona in Chiapas. I can also talk about that another time, but just pointing out the different things that I've been doing. And looking into preserving chili peppers that are endangered, like the chilhuacle chili. I'm working on setting something up like a nursery for those chilies so we can hold on to that biodiversity. And then I also teach with Herbancura, which has been a really fun platform. It's an Indigenous, Black, queer, trans-centered education platform with mostly, it's like a community of herbs and education. Yeah, and then with that, I kind of want to bring Chad on to share. So this is Chad's my husband, he's over here. He's my comalero, my griddle man. And for example, 100 tortillas, me alone, it takes me 2 hours. But with Chad, we can do 300 in an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm going to bring him in to talk a little bit about just more into the dream of Maize Nation.
Awesome. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you very much. So I'm Chad, and we're coming at you live from occupied Eastern Cherokee Federation land. And a little bit about my backstory is that since I was a teenager, I grew up in the middle of big ag country in Maryland. And every year I know the smell of glyphosate really well. And since I was probably 15 or 16, I've been really fascinated with permaculture and agroforestry, and spent my whole teens and 20s studying at different places. That's how I ended up in Hawaii, living for a long time, studying permaculture out there, and have always been interested in how to create resilient systems for changing environments. And right now I'm doing mostly building work, natural building, and then finished carpentry, because I saw the hole in the whole system, which was people who wanted to make beautiful permaculture systems, but didn't necessarily live in beautiful homes, or they lived in more conventional style homes. And so my hope was to kind of fill that gap and learn how to build beautiful natural homes that fit the right landscape. So that's what I'm up to now. But a huge passion of mine is how to create resilient systems. And in particular, did I say this? Okay, you want to go get another one? Okay, and that's our beautiful Bebe eating fresh, sexy organic apples. So, and specifically about Maize, the thing that really comes to mind is genetic drift, and the idea that you could have the most righteous organic farm with all heirloom seeds, and you could be doing it 100% right. You could even have pollen barriers on the entire perimeter of your land. But if, Joe below next to you is farming conventionally, then you're going to get genetic drift into your crops. And we know that getting that genetically modified gene crossbred into an heirloom seed or even a hybrid seed essentially degrades the whole genetics of heirloom grains. And grains are really susceptible to this. I feel like grains are probably one of the most fragile plants for genetic drift, because they require open pollination, and they require clean air for them to maintain their genetic integrity. So, just the idea that we're moving into an even more fragile ecosystem as we move into like deeper aspects of climate change. West Coast, the Rockies are probably being hit the hardest, the Southwest in the United States and North America. And so we always talk about solutions, right? It's like we run the place where the food, the crop, the grain gets turned into actual food for humans. But we're always trying to figure out how do we keep both integrity in our kitchen, but also helping farmers to create integrity in their spaces. And working with a lot of people on the East Coast and a lot of folks out West, one of the best solutions that I've heard, which is kind of to me inherently anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, is collaborative green spaces where people, when they think about purchasing land or stewarding land, begin to link certain tracts of land together. So like, say you're farming in different counties, rather than trying to commit all of your effort to farming separately, potentially figuring out how you can collectively connect tracts of land if a farm comes up for sale or land comes up for lease nearby, or better, connected to land that's already being farmed organically, grabbing those pieces of land and doing the right practices connected to one another. Because not only do you create more zones for genetic resilience, but you also get to operate with potentially shared infrastructure and collaborative resource use. And I think most importantly, it's about creating buffer zones. Like if you've ever been to the Willamette Valley up in the Northwest, you know that there's a lot of continuous organic farms together, so you can actually get really true organic processes going on together. And this is something that I don't necessarily see a lot of in Colorado. I see some of it in California, and there's a lot of organic farms next to each other and wineries in California, but there's still such a deeply embedded conventional ranching culture in Colorado that a lot of young folks who are trying to get into farming end up having their farm here and another farm there and a friend over here, and they're all trying their best, but working together in a collaborative network, which is why, like, the Colorado grain chain is such a cool opportunity for folks to digitally link together and then figure out how to create collaborative opportunities. Because it's one thing if you have the heirloom seed, right? You could have the best seed possible, but if the practice isn't happening on the land through no-till, through regenerative, through carbon sinking, through all the methods that we have at our disposal, then the best seed will turn out to be a mediocre crop. So how do we collaborate on those efforts? And then, okay, that's fine. You don't have to eat it. But the last little point that I want to make before I kind of tend to my little one here with his apple that he doesn't love very much is the idea, kind of reframing a concept in our mind about apocalypse and about catastrophic climate change events in relation to farming. And how, I'll try to answer that question in a second. And how catastrophe and apocalypse is actually a total creation of modern capitalism. And they want you to really believe that apocalypse is upon you. And I was kind of doing some last minute research this morning to get ready for this one. And the thing that kept popping up was the Svalbard seed vault, and how so many people have put their stock in this space as being as like the savior for plant genetics. We're going to lock all of these seeds away in some icy vault up north, and somehow we're going to be buffered from a changing planet in this space. And when apocalypse happens, then we're all going to go and get these seeds and we're going to replant them and rebuild our world as it used to be. And how actually, when you think about that, how absurd that actually is. Because that place is now being affected by climate change and is failing in a lot of ways, and how ultimately our ancestors already developed the most resilient systems to a changing climate, which was mindfulness in seed selection, caring for land in a holistic manner, in a collective manner, so that as climate changes, because it's constantly in flux, and it's more so now than it was, but our ancestors were also dealing with the changing climate as well, and how generation after generation they selected seeds for their changing environment. and how important it is for us to still do that and carry on that tradition, despite the rhetoric that we're all doomed. And how it's just more of an opportunity for us to collaborate, to connect land, to heal and regenerate land, and then also select seed as our ancestors did to get us here. Because the truth is, none of us would be here had they not selected the seed and tended the land in the way they did. So the questions of how big of a buffer is enough for corn, I mean, depending on how much wind you have in your area, how many trees there are. In Norwood, where we were, I can imagine that pollen could travel miles because there's often 30, 40 mile an hour winds with trees that are only 40 or 50 feet tall and huge open fields. Big dust storms that come out of the southwest, so it could potentially carry pollen miles. So
for those like beginner people here, the corn plant, essentially it's a grass and it'll grow, and then it'll essentially, the male part looks like a little pollen filaments that goes all the way up like a crown, and then more on the bottom the ears will start forming. And so it'll be a while until the pollen is released. And once the pollen is released, that you can just see it dangling. And so that's the point where the pollen naturally falls down on the silks, which is the female part of the ear, of the corn ear. And then each silk is one kernel inside the corn cob. So if you've ever kind of tried to just grow one corn plant, you will have to mostly hand pollinate for that corn cob to actually get all the kernels. So that's why corn is just grown just naturally. What would naturally happen was that within its own corn, it just kind of like shares all the pollen, and it just gets pollinated in that way.
Yeah, so probably the best idea that comes to my mind in exposed places like Colorado would be developing more of an agroforestry system where you have rows of trees, and you have kind of like a descending height hierarchy of plants, and then you get to your low-lying grains, and you orient this in such a way that you're capturing water and you're capturing optimal sunlight, right? So like as the sun comes up and over your project, you're not shading out your low-lying plants via the trees, but then you're also using that huge amount of carbon that the trees are pulling up, also utilizing hemp in these systems to then drop all that carbon onto the floor of your agroforest and feeding your grains. And that way, when you have the trees kind of like, think of it like alleyways, then you also can account for wind and how you project that wind. And if you're buffering it with rows, then you're actually giving yourself a bit more protection, so you can't get as many intruders of outside pollen into that. So there's a systems, and like the idea of like how far depends on where you are and your kind of elemental effects. But I would say that looking into systems like agroforestry for growing your grain is probably really intelligent, because at this point, if you're a grain farmer, you know how much fertility you have to create constantly, and how much that wind sucks moisture and how little moisture certain parts of Colorado actually get. And so being able to embed those systems in for long-term solutions and long-term fertility is really important. And then the idea of from Jen Colby, organizations. Specifically, I don't know any in Colorado, but I would say look into land trusts and see if there's any land trusts in the area that specifically help with biodynamic or organic farms, and seeing if there are grants available in order to get long-term leases. Leasing land is probably the easiest way for young farmers to get into the land. And as ranching becomes prohibitively expensive, it's phased out, and young people don't really want to ranch anymore, there's probably a lot more land available for leasing. And then if you can purchase it, even consider putting that into a land trust, so that if for some reason you can't make the bills or whatever, there's some sort of legal protection for that land to not be developed. And those are good things for young farmers to be thinking about. But I would just urge people who are interested to begin collaborating and try to figure out ways to decolonize your own mind around what farming is, because especially farming in the US, it's a fairly colonial it's a fairly colonial mindset. So if you can decolonize your mindset as to how you would collaborate with people, because maybe you have the land and someone has the information and someone has the resources, rather than those people being so nuclear and separated, how can you bring people in, have the tools for interpersonal relationship, have the tools for decolonization, for anti-racism, for all the things that you need in a modern group of people, and then implement farming techniques so that it can actually be a healthy space for people to have a long-term growing season in life. Because you can't just do this for 2 years, you know, to regenerate soil, you need many years. And we want to pass this on, like we're future ancestors. So we need to be thinking about multiple generations ahead of us and the fertile soil that they can rest in the shade of, and not just surviving catastrophe. So that's kind of all I got to say. Thanks for listening to me, Jab.
And then with all that, hopefully, you know, we'll get to a point where we can have a more natural seed trade, because at this point I'm personally really reluctant on trying to work with landrace heirloom seeds that are coming from Mexico to the USA because of the abundant presence of GMO corn specifically. And also, in a way, I mean, Colorado is part of Mexico. So it's also kind of like the continuation of those natural trade routes, and feeling really comfortable about supporting farmers in Mexico to continue farming so they don't have to leave their lands to come and work monocrop agriculture in the United States, etc. So for now, I feel really positive about the way that I'm sourcing corn for my foodstuffs.
And are
Thank
you
you.
guys able to do any sourcing in southern Colorado and in New Mexico with the indigenous farming communities down there?
You know, I looked up Tocabe. I listened when they were on, and I found Bow and Arrow. But I think they just have cornmeal available. I haven't contacted them for like big amount kind of products. We're just not at that point where I would be like, listen, I need a truckload and here's the cash. You know, because I also understand if you're making a value added product as a small business, that's just better for you rather than like selling off some of the corn that you can turn into a product that just brings in more money. So I haven't necessarily been able to get a hold of tribes. And I also understand that sometimes those markets are not even open because they kind of tend to keep their corn within, you know, kind of like for themselves, or like maybe the harvest is already taken and that kind of stuff. And again, I'm such a small operation that it hasn't happened where I'm like, listen, I can support you. And also like, I want to support you with money.
Sure,
Yeah.
We've had luck in Colorado with with corn and wheat as well, and some other grains, collaborating, you know, Chad, as you were talking about, with some kind of small farms, some small produce farmers that are kind of market driven and doing, you know, half an acre or 1 acre, and selecting some special seed, and not sure how it would apply to genetic drift and where the spacing of the farms would be located, but something to look at, just small test plots.
Yeah, and one of the actual advantages I've seen up in Colorado is that because it's so rancher heavy, that most of these people are importing the feed. You know, they're not necessarily, like where I grew up in Maryland, you know, the farmers are growing all of their grain for their cows that they're raising for either beef or dairy. So it's hyper difficult in that situation to be able to grow anything heirloom or organic. But I noticed that at least where we were in Colorado, I didn't see a ton of people growing their own grain, probably because it's just prohibitively expensive to do that. And so you probably are in actually a unique safe zone where you just have cows on the field. And if you can make it work in a lot of these places, there's probably not a ton of pollen in the air from GMO corn or wheat, that you actually could kind of hit the ground running a little bit easier in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question that popped up here. Are you guys familiar with the Arc of Taste, the Slow Foods Arc of Taste? The question is, how
I'm
effective
familiar.
is the Slow Foods Arc of Taste?
Yeah, I'm not sure how affecting it in what sense, as far as like the organization itself, or I just know for me, I've been in several conferences that they just come anywhere I've lived, and I just know that what they're about is, as far as my experience has just been within the slow food production of an actual recipe.
Mm-hmm.
Any time that you bring awareness in a good way to ingredients that are endangered, then you're gonna get fringe folks that might not have even known that was an ingredient that could go on the plate. And so just the interest, because I mean, most people aren't farmers, most people aren't producers, they're consumers. And so if you can get them interested, then that might even prompt the conversation for a farmer to grow something. So I'd say anytime there's like an actual real interest by consumers to save endangered heirloom foods, that's a good thing.
Sure. It seems like the best place to start is just feeding people really good food, and the smell of amazing native corn and the nixtamalization process. And I always think when I throw it in a hot griddle and suddenly your whole kitchen has this aroma that is indescribable with words. And when you share that food, people get pretty inspired and want to know where it came from and how to get more of it.
Totally.
Yeah.
On the slow
Yeah,
food.
and then I guess.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, just the difficulty I've found, because I want to create that aroma at the market, but to set yourself up in that way, you have to go through the Department of Health. You have to work from a commercial kitchen. You have to have a different type of insurance, etc. So it's like, I want to set it up in that way, and there's always like different barriers, kind of like the bureaucracy kind of happens. And it's interesting, Andy, it's like I have like I'm also like a super sourdough maker, and like all about local grains and heritage grains and all this stuff. And I used to share a stand with this person on Maui, and I taught her how to make bread. And then it was like this like social experiment, and mostly the people on the island that this market was there. It was just, again, it's taste buds, right? The bread was there and the tortillas were there, and the bread would sell out 40 minutes. And, the tortillas would take so much longer. This market was more in the like retired 50-year-old, like age bracket people there, kind of like. And so I feel like there's also this like kind of outside of California, I've just seen, and besides pocket in the US, it's actually really hard to sell a tortilla. It is to like dominant culture. So I'm kind of having like that challenge. Like the people that know, they're like, love you, thank you so much. It's like, I've been in a desert for years, but the people that don't know, there's a reluctancy that they just are like so conditioned to just purchase like $2.50 packaged tortillas from the supermarket. So it's been like a challenge, a beautiful one, but it's definitely like not like, yeah, start making tortillas and you're gonna be like, you're gonna be so successful. It's been a
yeah, you got to work. It's funny because my family and I will travel, to find a small steamy bag of hand-shaped tortillas, and we're just so excited and savor them and share them with friends and show them off. So it feels like the modern day commodity tortilla is a pretty rough food group compared to the flavor and aroma and texture and tradition in a real tortilla.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's really that the border just made everything packaged and ready to go and fast. So we don't even have that like understanding, like that like lifestyle of knowing that we're gonna go in the kitchen, we're gonna cook something, and it's gonna take some time. Like we have this idea. I mean, how many cookbooks? I think like have you seen, it's like dinner in 20 minutes, dinner in 30 minutes. So I'm all about the slow food, because it's, you know, if you're making tortillas, you're preparing the corn, and you gotta like plan it in the week, you know, this day is gonna happen this day you're gonna do this. So you gotta make sure that you're like have time for that, for all the processes, and make sure that you're, you know, packaging, well, like storing it in the right way, and then it has like this shelf life once it's fresh. And so it's definitely it's a process that I feel like dominant like kitchen culture, like modern day kitchen culture is difficult for people to get hip to it, you know. So it's like it starts with like even just being like okay with like you're gonna be in the kitchen for
And maybe that's
Yeah.
okay. I feel like, you know, with the pandemic and the this booming interest in sourdough, you know, people want to know how to nurture food from infancy and you know, have this living sourdough starter. And it seems that people now are committing time to finding success within those recipes and processes. It's tricky, right? It's nobody makes a perfect tortilla the first time. Nobody makes the perfect loaf of sourdough the first time. It all tastes great, and it just requires some nuancing. I wonder, you know, I meet a lot of people who've never heard the phrase nixtamalization. And my kids actually joke with me, you know, like, Dad, we heard you say nixtamal or nixtamal, you know, 3 times today, and nobody knows what that is, you know. Can you talk a little bit about what that process is and how you do it?
Yeah, totally. So neat. So basically, let's go back to what this word is. And so it's a Nahuatl word. So Nahuatl is the native language that's spoken by millions of people to this day. I think around maybe 2 million people speak a variant of Nahuatl in the lands we call Mexico. So there's about 22 variants of Nahuatl. The one that I study is the one that's Altiplano Central. I have a Nahuatl teacher. I meet with him weekly. It's awesome. He only teaches in Spanish Nahuatl. So if you are interested in learning Nahuatl, you have to be an Spanish speaker. That's just the way that he teaches. It's better. And you can always reach out to me for that if you like. And so first of all, correct pronunciation, decolonized pronunciation, I should say, is so in Spanish, Castellano, we would say nixtamal, because there's an accented last vowel, which actually is incorrect. The correct pronunciation is nixtamal. So actually the Castellano people say, so Spanish speaking people just say nixtamal, but it's actually nixtamal. So another example is Teotihuacan. So the correct pronunciation is Teotihuacan. So you do the accent on the second to last vowel, not on the last vowel. And it comes from 2 words, neshli and tamali. So it basically, neshli means ashes. So essentially it's like basically saying that it's produced with ashes. Tamali is a Maya word, actually, but neshli means produced with ashes. So it's kind of like produced with ashes kind of thing. And so nixtamal, in this case, I don't use ashes, but you're wanting to use an alkaline bath for your corn. So you're simmering the corn. I use chef grade cal lime, as in the mineral lime, not like lime juice. Sometimes when people read on the ingredients of the tortilla, they think it's lime as in like the citrus. And water, that's it, just purified water. And then so you simmer it. Every corn variety has a different like simmering point, and then it sits overnight. I like to let mine sit for at least 8 hours. This is crucial, because otherwise, if you don't nixtamalize, your corn is gummy and sticky because the sugars haven't alchemized. So that's what we're doing. The sugars and the starches will alchemize because the corn doesn't have gluten like bread. So the nixtamalization is gonna basically make everything bind together, not make it sticky. And then the pericarp of the corn also just kind of is a natural gum that will keep the tortilla together. And so once it's soaked, I do a rinse. And then I used to hand grind up first, just using, this is the most basic hand tool that you can find anywhere, is just like a pasta machine that it just clamps down on the table. And it has like a handle that's like a bicycle wheel kind of thing. And then you just, it has a hopper and you just start putting the corn. So it's a wet grinder. Don't try to do this corn in your dry, beautiful dry grinders, because you'll mess it up. So you need either the wet grinder, like Victoria hand mill, which is like $40. Hopper, grinding, you're adding a little bit of water, trickle water. And then you have your fresh masa. And then from there you can make anything. And then I specifically use Hacienda's Molinito. So that is a bigger machine. It's not industrial. It's a countertop machine. I would say it's pre like commercial industrial size. Otherwise, from like the hand crank, you kind of like are spending $10,000. But this one's, I think, like you're kind of wanting to invest at least $2,000. It takes quite a while to grind the corn, as far as like thinking about, you know, I'm not like a tortilla company only. So I would say, let's see, how much I can remember. Okay, so about, I'd say 13 pounds of corn, like nixtamalized corn, takes me about, depending, you know, how my stones are that day, I'd say close to 2 hours with cleanup and prep just to grind the masa. And then that's probably around another, with a griddle man, and then packaging the tortillas, another 2.5 hours for making all those 13 pounds of tortillas packaged and everything and being ready for market. Plus like the nixtamalization in itself for like that 13 pounds, I'd say like is another at least hour of work and cleanup. And then you have to count in the soak time. So that's kind of like about, that gives you about 30 packs of 5-ish inch, 10 packs of tortilla.
Wow. Thank goodness for the griddleman's help too there.
Yeah, I was much slower myself, but I've had to do it occasionally, but it's really nice to just, you know, have it. And I hand press everything and I throw it on the griddle. And yeah, it's definitely like a learn, like you gotta give yourself, like, just be patient because you're gonna mess it up. And you just, like, if you add too much water, you got putty, so you need to make tamales, or, you know, you just save it for corn mush breakfast. But it's really like, takes some time to like really learn the technology of the masa, of the water, and
Abuelita technology.
also the corn.
The Abuelita technology,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
And just real quick here, because this has been amazing. We're coming up on a couple minutes left here in the session. What does Abuelita Technology mean to you? Where did that come from?
So it's basically, yeah, it's so I kind of, it's this remembrance of what our grandmothers, essentially our ancestors, had this knowledge that we've just somehow forgotten in modern times. So anything in all cultures, not just my indigenous ancestry. I'm speaking of all our ancestors generations back had slow food systems. We're making sourdough bread. We're making just, you know, things that took time and you had a plan. And so it's like really taking back these technologies, because they are technologies. Technology isn't just like science and robots. It's like things that we can do with nature and about nature. They're instructions. And so this is like a movement. I'm all about movement to remember those things, because we want to pass that down for our children, essentially. And that's the best way we can be in relationship with Earth.
It's beautiful. Well done. And congratulations on having such a deep and wide breadth of work that you're doing every day. I feel like it's really encouraging to be around someone like you who's actually achieving these goals and eating close to home and eating with tradition. When I opened my little micro bakery 6 years ago, I sort of checked out of the larger food system in working in the natural food system, even with Whole Foods Market and such. But I just wanted to control, what ingredients we were buying and from whom, and do it the way we wanted to. And the only way I could figure out how to do that was to take, complete control. And it feels good to be, at a place where you're sourcing and working within the community that you want to be working with, and sometimes it feels almost insurmountable to imagine how we can connect all these dots. But great honor to have you and Chad here doing the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. And how can people find you and find your tortillas and tamales and so forth?
So I've been doing both Telluride and Norwood farmers markets, and then right now I'm not doing them because we're traveling. But I will put my Instagram handle here, and then this is where I have like all the updates. That's the best way to get kind of like check in and say hi. And I'm always into looking for collabs, or people want to present, have me speak somewhere or get to know somebody that's doing the same thing. Please reach out. I always love connecting in that way, because a lot of times I do travel from people in lots of places, like good friends and family. So I might just be passing by. So that's nice.
Awesome.
And then
I'd like to connect you with my friend Liliana, who's from Austin, from Mexico, living in Austin and currently in Oaxaca. But she's an amazing gal and deep in the food world, and connect you guys offline.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great. I'm feeling that Oaxaca is in my close near future. I'm this close. Like I had told Andy, we were scheduled for our green card interview, but it was back in Hawaii, so we were able to change the jurisdiction. So today, right now, I'd be in the green card interview, but we're able to change it. So it's at any moment now, and I'll be passing by Denver, hopefully getting to eat some amazing stuff that you have, because I'm all about sexy croissants.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time today. Wonderful to meet your family. And guys, everyone, thanks for showing up today. Don't forget, we have our bake sale for racial justice going on this Saturday and Sunday. It's not too late to join. You can bake a scone or a sexy croissant or whatever you want and sell it to your community, and get the proceeds over to us, and we'll bring it over to the Pueblo Food Project. Moxie is donating flour, as is freshly milled and dry storage. So if you want flour for making your baked goods, just show up at one of those locations and we will donate some flour. So everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.